Okay, so the first question, guys, is you want to look at the diagonals and which ones are perpendicular and bisect each other. So there's two pieces to this. This was on a quiz the other day, so I wanted to put it back up. Okay, so the diagonals are perpendicular and they bisect each other. Okay, so go ahead and pick the best option. Okay, so the trick here is that there's two things that have to be true. So perpendicular means that they're crossing at 90 degrees. And the kite does do that, guys. And this was the hard one on the quiz the other day. A kite does intersect at 90 degrees. But the key here is and bisects each other. Bisects each other means that each diagonal is getting cut equally in half. A kite doesn't do that. The long one does bisect the short one, but that short one is not cutting that long diagonal equally. You can see that very clear on the picture on D, okay? So the only one that also has a perpendicular would be a square, okay? And in this case, it is going to be equal. So each of these diagonals are cut in half, okay? So again, this was a question on one of the quizzes, so just be really careful that you're reading that it follows both properties, not just one, okay? All right, let's try the next one. A quadrilateral in which two pairs of adjacent sides are congruent. Okay, so read this carefully. We're talking about adjacent sides are congruent. Okay, so the trick here is that we're talking about adjacent sides. If you remember, adjacent sides are next to each other, right? And so again, with a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent, not adjacent. Adjacent means next to, so that is the kite, guys. The two small sides that are next to each other are equal to each other, and the two longer sides that are next to each other are equal to each other. In a trapezoid, when it's an isosceles trapezoid, the legs are equal to each other, but the bases are not. And the legs are opposite of each other, okay? So again, the word adjacent means next to. Okay, so you should have picked the kite. Okay, we're trying to figure out which one is not describing a rhombus. So out of these, which one is not describing a rhombus? A little trickier, but if you read all of them, there's one that stands out that you should know is not a rhombus, okay?
Hey, miss, is this the grade?
No, we're just practicing.
Okay.
Okay, so some of them might have been a little tricky because a rhombus does follow a lot of properties, guys. The one that is very distinct is it does not have 4 right angles, okay? So the diagonals are perpendicular. The sides are parallel, right? And then the diagonals do bisect, but they do not have right angles. So a rhombus is more of, remember, like a diamond, and so those angles are not 90 degrees. So that's the one that's not, okay? Okay, we want to know which one is true about all rectangles. So you got to think about all rectangles. The reason we're saying all rectangles is because sometimes a rectangle might follow some of the rules of a square, but not always. And so we want to know which one of these always follows the rules, right, of a rectangle. So the saying is a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not always a square, right? And so if the rectangle happens to be a square, then the diagonals are perpendicular. But if it's just a rectangle that we usually think about, where the sides are opposite of each other, are equal, but not all 4 sides, then the diagonals do bisect each other, and the diagonals will be congruent to each other, okay? So that is true about all rectangles. The other one is only true if it's really a square that we're calling a rectangle, okay? Which one is false? So you're trying to figure out which one's false. Which statement is false? Okay, so the first one talked about a trapezoid having one set of parallel lines. That is true. The bases are parallel, just one, right? Their sides, their legs are not parallel, but the top base and the bottom base are. And so one pair of parallel lines, that is true. A quadrilateral is a 4-sided polygon. That is everything. So if you look at your tree diagram, you'll notice the top says quadrilateral. All the shapes we're talking about are quadrilaterals. And then they're a little more specific, right? So everything we've been doing, though, is a quadrilateral. A rectangle has 4 right angles. That is correct. A rectangle does have 4 right angles. So the last one, a rhombus has 4 right angles. That's the false one, okay? A rhombus, remember we just talked about, does not have 4 right angles. Which quadrilaterals have 4 congruent sides? And read it carefully. All must be true, okay? So which ones have 4 sides that are equal. Okay, so when we're talking about four congruent sides, that means all their sides are equal to each other. There are only two shapes that do that, and that's a rhombus and a square, okay? So rhombus has four sides that are equal, and a square has four sides that are equal, okay? Okay, so this one we're trying to find the shape that follows all these properties, so read it carefully. It has all sides that are congruent, opposite sides are parallel, and opposite angles are equal. So we're trying to find a shape that follows all three of those. So it's important to make sure that it follows all of these properties, okay, in order for it to be true. Because some of them follow some of them, but not all of them. Okay, good. So most of you got it right. So it is a rhombus. Okay, a rhombus is the only one that has all sides that are congruent out of these. So that was kind of a giveaway. Opposite sides are parallel. That could have been a parallelogram, a rectangle, or a rhombus. And the last one is blocked, but I think it was angles. So opposite angles that are equal, those are parallelogram, rectangle, and rhombus as well, okay? So again, it needed to be all of them. So rhombus fell under all of those. Let's try it again. Remember, the shape has to follow all the properties. So in this one, opposite sides are congruent, opposite sides are parallel, and there's no right angles. So right away, with no right angles, you should be able to eliminate two, because two of them have right angles. We're trying to find one that has no right angles. Opposite sides are parallel and opposite sides are congruent. So again, the big key was there's no right angles. So you should have been able to eliminate the square and the rectangle, because those both have 90 degrees. So then you were down to parallelogram and trapezoid. The key here was opposite sides are congruent. That means both opposite sides. And so the only one that's true there is the parallelogram, because a trapezoid, if it's an isosceles trapezoid, its legs will be congruent, but its bases will not be. So think of a trapezoid, its top base and its bottom base are not the same size, okay? So all of the following quadrilaterals have two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel, except. So you're trying to find the one that does not have two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel. We've kind of given away the hint to this one in the last questions, so hopefully you remember. Okay, so again, the clue is two pairs of opposite sides. So not just one pair, okay? And so the one that only has one pair was the trapezoid. Good, and we gave that answer kind of earlier because with the trapezoid, it only has its bases that are parallel. Its legs are not. They kind of go out and they'll end up running into each other eventually if it kept going, okay? Where a parallelogram, it's in the word. They've got two parallel sets, and so does the rectangle and the square. Okay, so trapezoid was correct. Okay, we're gonna fill in the blank here. A rectangle is blank a square. So a rectangle is sometimes a square, always a square, or never a square. So think about the properties. Can a rectangle ever be a square? And if so, is it sometimes or always? If not, then it'd be never, right? So this one's a little trickier because as we usually say a square can be a rectangle, but can a rectangle be a square? And the answer is actually sometimes. You know, if a square is a rectangle, then in order for the rectangle to be a square, it would have to be the square. But remember, a square can be a rectangle. So sometimes is the answer, okay? And the sometimes is when all four sides are congruent, just so you know. Let's try another one. So in this one, it says a rectangle is blank a square. That's the one we just did. Why did it repeat it? Go ahead and answer it. That was the one we just did. I must have hit restart. I'm sorry. Okay. Here's the next one. Okay, a parallelogram is blank a quadrilateral. So we want to know, is it sometimes, always, or never? So look at your tree diagram. It does tell you the order of things. So a quadrilateral is a four-sided polygon. So the question is a parallelogram always, sometimes, or never a quadrilateral? And the answer is always, because if you think about our tree diagram, everything we're talking about is a quadrilateral. So all of the shapes we're learning about have four sides.
Shut.
A rhombus is blank a trapezoid. Sometimes, always, or never. So think of the properties of a trapezoid and a rhombus. Okay, so in this case, a rhombus is never a trapezoid, guys. They do not have the same properties where they can line up to be one or the other, okay? So are there any questions on any of those that we went over that kind of stumped you a little bit before the bell rings?